Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's Tech Showcase. We've got some really great presentations here for you today, but before we dive in, I just want to go over a few housekeeping rules. First, we do have that chat box. Make sure to drop your LinkedIn, let us know where you're tuning in from or what you're most looking forward to hearing about today. Then we also have that questions box. If you have any questions for our speaker, make sure to put them there and we will get to them at the end of the session. So now I will hand it on over to Bradley.
Thank you so much. Wonderful to be with everyone today. And what we're going to look at is trends and fads and how to tell the difference. So I'm going to open up my presentation. For some of you, my face may disappear. Hopefully for most of you, though, it stays there and this is a bit more interactive. But what we're going to do is we want to understand trends. And firstly, just to share a little bit about Converseon. Really, we have been leaders in AI-powered insights since 2008. And our platform, Converseon, really has enabled us to derive quantitative data from conversations. And so that's really important. That's one component here that we will be using today, or that we did use to prepare this. And the next thing is that this platform and our methods and processes have been recognized by many. And back when this was still Twitter, Twitter recognized that we really do help and reduce the level of work required to make sense of unstructured data. So now on to today's presentation about trends, really the challenge and the opportunity. We know that when a trend takes hold in a category, it is a force to be reckoned with. We also know that if you can innovate a product that will take advantage of that trend or will meet the needs of that trend, you're going to be riding with it. And that's really one of the goals of innovation, is to find out what the trends are, to get a well-executed product into the market, and then to ride that trend and enjoy the benefit that comes to you as a business because of it, and also increase your number of customers and satisfied customers because you're really addressing what they want. So the trick is, what is really going to become a trend and what is just a fad? And that's fairly easy to do in hindsight because you can just look at the data, and we're going to do that. And we're also going to do some predictions where we're going to work out years in advance what was a trend and what was a fad, and give a very simple rule of thumb for it, as well as just illustrate how we go about it at Converseon. So really, this is about trend forecasting from conversation data. And the importance of this is that you really don't know something might become a trend until often it's too late. And then you start doing your research and doing your surveys, but you've missed out on the start of it. How long has that trend been around for? And that's why we use conversation data. This particular presentation was done from Twitter and Reddit data. And what that allows us to do is to time travel. So we were able to go back to the start of 2019 and pre-COVID really, and look at various different ingredients, which we're going to use as a case study, and show you how these ingredients either developed into trends or gave false signals as fads, which is a real problem. So they start off wonderful and then they just collapse on themselves, or just continued in decline, and how you can tell the difference between them. So really, this is about understanding trends and the little signals that consumers are telling us, and how we can use that to our advantage years in advance. It's a very simple framework of decomposing trends, and it's got two major components which help us to understand future demand. And that is, firstly, metric number one, trend power. Now, trend power is all about how strong a trend is. That's fairly easy to understand. But this is really about the demand that the consumer has for what is trending. So if, for example, we see coconut oil trending, what is the consumer demand for that at different points in time? That helps us to understand trend power. And then when we get to execution is how different brands have taken that trend, in this example, coconut oil, and have worked with it to bring it to market. Now, their execution includes their marketing, It includes how well it addresses the needs of the consumer and all of these good things. So it's above the line as well as the product itself. So that's trend power and execution. Now, when these two come together, they create the most wonderful formula. And I'm going to show you that in a moment and how it works out. But let's look at our data set. So what we did was we went and we pulled data from 2019 through 2022. And to do this, we analyzed millions of conversations in the skincare category. Now, we used our platform, Converseon, to pull out these different topics. And you can see here we've got aloe and antioxidant, ceramides, charcoal, and so on. These different ingredients. And these ingredients then are either going to trend or not trend. Now, if you have a product with these ingredients and they're trending, you're going to be riding that wave of success we were talking about. If, however, you bet on the wrong thing, then your product is going to struggle to succeed because what it is offering to the consumer is having less and less demand. So how do we tell that in advance before you make the product? How can we, from 2019 and 2020 data, figure out what's going to be successful in 2022? You need the time as brands and product owners and managers to develop things, to get them out into the factory, the marketing, the packaging, everything. This needs time, which you often don't have. So if we look through the list and we said, now, well, what about retinoids? Aren't those quite successful? Isn't that something which is going to succeed in the future? Shouldn't we make a product around it? Well, how do we know? How can we be sure? That's what this is about. We're answering that question. Let's move forward. Now, this is purely tabulated data. This is no methodology involved, just pure counts. And we can see things like ceramides in 2019 was 1,600, and then 2,500 in 2020, and then 2022, 5,600. Now that's a lovely trend. You can see strong increase in the volume that it is spoken about, specifically within skincare. So there's more and more conversation about it. That's really great. And if you look through the columns, the growth table on the left is really the ones which are growing year on year. On the right-hand side, we have the ones which, when we compare 2020 to 2022, they've decreased. Now, SPSF is just on the line. It's a very small decrease. If anything, it's starting to plateau. Versus if we look at something like green tea, goes from 600 odd to 400, which is quite a significant decrease. That's a 1/3 decrease. So we have things increasing and decreasing. Now, for the middle section, I've labeled things called fad, because these are the tricky ones. These are the ones where we look at them and we say, let's look in we're sitting in the end of 2020. We're trying to decide what products we should be developing, what should we be focusing on. And we go and we look and we see squalene, probably not saying it correctly, 1,700 to 2,300. So quite a significant increase year on year in the volume that it's been spoken about. Surely that's something we should invest in. We should bring a product out with that. Fast forward to 2022, a little over 1,100. The volume has more than halved. Now that's quite something. And that's essentially the exercise. What if, only looking at 2019 and 2020 data, we could figure out, give or take, what's going to sit in the green bucket, what's going to be in the orange fads, and what's going to be in the fully decline. Even those three categories would be extremely useful. Now, our system does exactly that. And what we have next is a little chart, which is hopefully very clear for everyone. And I'll explain it. We have on the left-hand vertical axis, trend power. So that's what I was speaking about. What is the demand of this in the market? And what do we see? Where you see 1 on the scale, that's really where the trend power is okay. Anything above that is good. Anything below that is poor. And then on the horizontal axis, we have execution. And the same applies. Anything less than 1 there is poor execution. Anything greater than 1 is good execution. So I put a little red block around all of the ingredients which scored according to our system using only 2019 and 2020 data. Important, there is no data after 2020 used. Our system scored all of those ones in red. So vitamin E, charcoal, tea tree, all of those are scored in red because their execution and their trend power is actually not great. It's below that minimum threshold that we have. And so that's our first very clear thing. These are going to decline according to our system. And we'll check in a moment. We'll put it side by side and see how we did with our predictions. Then we look at this top left-hand part of the chart. So we've got this dotted line along the middle. And the dotted line tells us where trend power is greater than execution. And this is an interesting finding and discovery. If your underlying trend is stronger than the execution in the market, there is a good probability that it's going to grow. So over here, we've got collagen, and that comes out as an absolute winner. It's at the top. It's way above its execution, and it's a very strong trend. So we should see something special happen with collagen. Aloe is also quite interesting. Then we've got a cluster of winners, which we believe, antioxidants, ceramides, etc. Now, they're all coded in blue. So everything blue here, we are predicting is going to increase from 2020 to 2022 in the future. What is in yellow is very close to this line. Now, because it's close to the line, that's really telling us it may be a trend or it may be a fad. There's a caution. So be careful how you invest in this. The fact that they sit on the bottom part of this line, our system then says, hey, this is most likely going to be a fad. Certainly for square leaning red, it's very far from the line. It is going to be a fad. We've seen a great increase year on year from 2019 to 2020, but we expect to see quite a decline in 2022. So it's a very simple illustration around what's succeeding and what's not going to, well, what we predict will succeed and what we predict won't succeed. There are some marginal cases in the middle which could go either way. And I guess up front, just to say, those marginal cases, whether we're right or we're wrong, we should probably discount them from the accuracy of the entire system. Certainly what's in blue, red, and in the red block, that we have a good level of confidence about. Now, let's put them side by side and see what has happened. Firstly, we look at the top block. Now, remember, collagen was our strongest trend. It had a score of 2.7 and the execution was 1.7. We also see its volume went from 900 odd in 2020 to 8,600 or 8,600 in 2022. That is the breakout trend. If you had had a product with collagen providing all of those benefits to the consumer's needs around it, that would have been a sure winner. As long as your execution was up to scratch, that is. Of course, your individual brand and product needs to deliver, but having that ingredient would have really helped you. You would have been swimming downstream. So that's what we see with collagen. Aloe, we noted, was also another strong one, only a slight increase there. Very strong trend. The execution, however, has been just on the one. So this leads one to think, is there a way to better execute skincare products with aloe? Because if there is, well, you might just be the one to crack the golden egg, so to speak, and win that prize and ride that one. So there's a lot of trend power sitting in aloe that is unutilized, but nonetheless still correct. It is in the green bucket as we predicted. Antioxidants, again, we see the same thing. We see a very strong score and we see the execution quite strong as well. Now, what I do want to call out is if we average all of these growth trends, we see that the average score was 1.8. And if we average the execution, we see 1.4. In other words, we have exactly what we were looking at on the previous chart. The trend power is greater than the execution. And that's really important. So we have a very strong trend and we have the execution following up. Why is that important? The reason that's important is that execution in the market is going to generate a response from the consumer. Now, if that response is disproportionate or outsizes the underlying demand, what we're doing is hyping consumers up. We are getting them as marketers and as brand owners, we are getting them all excited about something, but their demand doesn't rise to that same level, to that occasion. To illustrate this, let's look at the orange middle block, well, where the highlighted orange spark lines are. We can look at vitamin C, for example. We see that in 2019, it was 3,900. It increased significantly to 5,700. That would be a profound change in its momentum and its volume, and should make us think, wow, let's take note. However, when we look at the two components of trend and execution, we see that the trend is fairly strong, 1.4. However, the execution is stronger. In other words, there is a little bit of hype surrounding this product. And that's where we need to stop and think and go, it's marginal, it's on the line. Remember on the previous chart, this was quite close to that diagonal line, which tells us there's a caution. And in fact, if we look at what happened, 5,700 decreased to the 4,800 in 2022, which told us it is a fad, so to speak, because instead of seeing constant year-on-year growth, which is what we define as a growth trend, we rather see this peak and then decline. Now, what happens in the future, we'd have to reanalyze the data to understand, is this going to continue to decrease or will this increase? We need to run the numbers for 2021 and 2022 to say what will happen 23, 24, and likewise this year and last year for next year and the year beyond. So as it stands, we can see that there's vitamin C had this fad effect taking place. We can also look at something like squalene, which we saw on the chart stood out rather abruptly in red. In fact, let me just go back to that to show you, because I think it helps to illustrate. Here we've got squalene in red. You can see it's quite far from the diagonal, which is that median point between the trend and the execution. Now, let's jump across back here again. Squalene, 0.8 and 1.3 execution. In other words, a lot of hype. Consumers are responding to the efforts of the brands rather than having this innate trend demand. And we've got 1,700. I know I'm always leaving off the end bits there, but anyway, to 23, and then a massive drop to 1,100. That is a perfect example of something where the response in the market around demand is telling us the trend doesn't have any power to it, whereas the execution is wonderful. It's brilliant. It's generating so much interest amongst the consumer. It's really getting hyped up, but unfortunately, it's got nothing. There's no substance to it. So maybe all bark and no bite, as they might say. So we see there, if we were to continue this exercise, we would notice the exact pattern which takes place. And I do want to call out, there's a few lucky ones here where literally vitamin E was 0.99 rounded, well, I think it was a 9.8 rounded, and then there was a 1.01 rounded. And we see for vitamin E a 1 and a 1. So it's a fad, technically. That's really lucky. It's really on the line. The numbers also confirm 651 to 679 to 647. It's really just consistent. It's not jumping up and down. The spark line overemphasizes this because it takes only those data points into account for the scaling. Anyway, so what we saw for growth was that the trend power was greater than the execution. In other words, the substance was more than the hype. And then what we see for a fad is 0.9 average versus a 1.2 on execution. The substance is less than the hype. And now we come to the easy one, the declining trends. Well, we see the trend power for all the declining trends is the same. They're less than that critical one, which we have in our system it's telling us the trend is shrinking. And so the trend power here is telling us it's in decline. The execution for all of them except one is telling us it's in decline. Therefore, the predictions are that these are going to decline. There's a little note here on argan oil. Anyone can correct me on that one, where we said it'll decrease, but again, it's so close on the rounding that the system might have put it in as a fad. Nonetheless, the warning would have been correct. Watch out. So if we take a few of these as really close and remove them from the sample, we're really looking at getting 80% correct on the system, which is pretty good. And it's really robust, works in multiple categories, as long as we're able to define a way of understanding consumer demand and put that upon the actual element, whether it's an ingredient, whether it's a flavor, whether it's an element of customer service. You could have done this for chatbots and seen as chatbots around certain areas and queries. It's all about trend forecasting, and the principles are the same. Is there consumer demand that we can define for it? And then what is the execution like? And it generates a certain buzz in the public. If that buzz outsizes the trend, it's most likely going to end up being a fad. It'll come and go. If the two are really strong, but the trend power is much stronger than the execution, that's something to look at. And if we get high trend power scores that are really outsizing all the other brands, or sorry, not the brands, all the other ingredients, the flavors, attributes, benefits, then that's something to pay attention to. That might well just be the next big thing. So let's move on, and then we can get to some questions. Firstly, we can see what this tells us is that conversation data on products is a useful source of data for predicting what will matter in the future. So in this case, 2022 was the future. The second thing that we must note about this is that we do need robust models to accurately classify the ingredients or the flavors or whatever we're doing. We really must have accurate data here. We ensured that our models were getting us at least 80% classification correct. So if someone posted and you read 10 of those posts, 8 of them would be on topic about the ingredient, about the demand, the trend power, or about the execution as we wanted. And then 2 of them would be wrong because nothing's perfect. But you can see 80% is the level of quality you need. 50 or 60 is not good enough. 50 is, it's not random, but feels pretty random. So we do need robust classification. Your NLP needs to be very strong. We do need strong sentiment models as well. I need to mention this. Sentiment analysis forms a key part of the execution. How do you know if the execution is going to be really good or bad, or if it's just a lot of noise? Like maybe you say something that generates huge buzz in the market, but it's very negative. Certainly that can't count towards positive execution. So you do need to use sentiment so you can have polarity on your execution and figure out what's positive and what's negative. Now, for me, the most important thing from this presentation would be that trend power, the underlying consumer demand for a trend, and the execution thereof, the response of the consumer to the brands and products that have been made, are shown to be strong predictors of future performance. I guess it's common sense. You build, if what you build rests on strong trends, then you build them well, you will succeed. If what you build is on a weak trend, no matter how well you build it, it's probably going to fail. So with that, we have 5 minutes left, and I will pause to see if there are any questions and the like. But thank you very much for your time and your attention today.
Great, thank you. We do have some questions for you. Just as a reminder to the audience, if you have any questions, make sure to drop them in that questions box. So Bradley, could you explain again what execution is representing?
Sure. Execution is really about what the consumers are playing back from the brands and their experience of the ingredients. So perhaps I buy a skincare product, I use it, gives me a rash. My response to the execution is going to be a negative one. So that's going to be like a -1 for you. Someone else buys the product, they use it, and oh, it's just so moisturizing, it's so lovely. My skin is just renewed and wonderful, and I post about that. It's going to be a +1 for you. So execution is really about how are people experiencing this.
Great. And then would you mind expanding on how execution is calculated? Is it through that conversation data only?
Correct. Execution is only the conversation data, and there's two main components of that. We're looking at the volume that is being generated by those conversations where people are having interaction with the ingredients and the associated sentiment with it, which is why I was saying sentiment models are so important. So um, we can tell if people are happy with a product or not. And I'm sure for those of you who've interacted with social data and you've read through different posts, it becomes blindingly obvious where your strengths and your weaknesses are. And really, that's what we're doing. We're looking at the strengths and weaknesses of different brands across ingredients. And instead of breaking it to a brand level, we're just summing that up to a category level.
Great. Thank you. How much data is needed before you can predict the success or failure of a trend?
Mm-hmm. Now, we did have some rather small ones in here. There was one that had less than 100 very highly classified posts, but in general, annual volumes of 3, 4, 500, that is a good starting point. So once a trend gets a couple of hundred posts in a year, or I shouldn't say trend, once a topic gets a couple of hundred posts in a year, we'll start to be able to figure out whether it's going to be a trend or not, um, and whether this is going to last and run the race, so to speak, or if it's going to fail and run out of steam too early.
Awesome. I've got one last question for you. Do you know if this will work for service products as well as it does for consumer goods?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so it absolutely does work for service products, and if you think about an example from my own history, I suppose, is mobile money, where in Africa there's a huge unbanked population. You're then looking at a service product which is a digital innovation, and it's about money, having a bank account, but it's all linked to your mobile phone number or mobile phone provider. And so uh, that, for example, as a trend would be analyzed and have shown, wow, there's really strong trend power here. There's a massive um, resonance in the execution with the end consumer. And so we've got our two components. So as long as we can get those two components, the power of the trend as well as the execution or the resonance of the execution in the audience, then we are able to figure it out. So services, absolutely, um, as well as consumer goods and definitely FMCG.
Great. It looks like that's all the time that we have today for questions. If you're interested in getting in touch with Bradley, his email is on the screen. And if you're interested in watching this presentation back, it'll be available on the Green Book website. So thank you, Bradley, and thank you to all of our attendees for being here. I hope you all have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.